There are more jellyfish in some parts of the ocean right now than at almost any point in recent memory, and most of the Western world has no idea what to do with any of them. In parts of the Sea of Japan, in the Gulf of Mexico, off the coast of Namibia, jellyfish blooms have grown so massive that they have clogged the cooling intakes of nuclear power plants, forced the shutdown of coastal desalination facilities, and torn through fishing nets faster than crews can repair them. The 2009 bloom off the coast of Japan alone caused an estimated $89.6 million in damage to the fishing industry, with individual jellyfish weighing up to 200 kilograms each and, during the worst blooms, hundreds of millions of them passing through fishing grounds in a single day, capsizing at least one trawler that tried to haul in a net too heavy to lift. Marine biologists have a name for what's happening. Jellyfish are winning, at least in the places where blooms keep recurring. Warming oceans, overfishing of their natural predators, and nutrient runoff from agriculture have created conditions that jellyfish thrive in while nearly every other marine species struggles. And here's the strange part. While Western fishing industries treat this as a catastrophe, an entire region of the world has been treating jellyfish as dinner for over 1,700 years. So the real question isn't whether jellyfish can be eaten. That question was answered by an entire civilization more than a millennium before Columbus ever set sail. The real question is, why does an animal that is abundant, sustainable, low in fat, and already considered a delicacy by billions of people remain almost completely invisible on Western plates? Let's start with what jellyfish actually are, because the biology matters more than you'd expect. A jellyfish is roughly 95 to 98% water, which sounds like it should make the animal nutritionally worthless. It doesn't. What's left after the water is a dense structural protein called collagen, arranged in a lattice that gives jellyfish their signature texture somewhere between crunchy and gelatinous, once properly processed. Edible jellyfish species, primarily in the genus Rapilema, contain almost no fat, moderate protein, and a collagen profile that some nutrition researchers have specifically studied for potential skin and joint health benefits. The same collagen marketed in expensive supplement powders sold at Western pharmacies for $30 a jar. The irony writes itself. People in Los Angeles and London are paying premium prices for powdered collagen supplements, while an entire living, swimming source of that exact compound drifts through the ocean, mostly ignored, sometimes actively poisoned with chemical deterrents to keep it away from beaches, and power plant intakes. The Chinese relationship with jellyfish as food stretches back further than almost any other seafood tradition still practiced today. Historical records place jellyfish consumption in China as early as the Eastern Jin dynasty, roughly 300 to 400 CE, with the earliest known written references describing it as haijie, sea jellyfish, prepared and traded as a delicacy along the eastern coast. By the Tang and Song dynasties, centuries later, jellyfish processing had developed into a genuine craft industry, with specific techniques for curing the animal passed down through generations of coastal families. The processing method that emerged, and which is still used almost unchanged today, involves treating fresh jellyfish with a combination of salt and alum, a naturally occurring mineral compound, over a period of roughly 30 to 40 days. This process draws out the water content, firms up the collagen structure, and transforms what starts as a fragile, nearly transparent creature into a firm, rubbery product that can be stored for months without refrigeration, an enormous advantage in an era centuries before mechanical cooling existed. The dried, salted result looks almost nothing like the living animal. It's this processed form, not the raw jellyfish pulled straight from the ocean, that shows up in the dish most Westerners have actually encountered without realizing it. Jellyfish salad, thinly sliced, dressed in sesame oil, rice vinegar, and chili, served cold as an appetizer in Cantonese and Sichuan restaurants across the world. The texture is the entire point. A distinctive, springy crunch that food scientists describe as almost unique in the culinary world. Nothing else quite replicates it. Not mushroom, not seaweed, not any commonly available Western ingredient. By the time European traders began establishing regular contact with Chinese coastal ports during the Ming and Qing dynasties, jellyfish was already a fully mature culinary category, complete with regional variations, specialized processing guilds, and its own place within the broader category of dried and cured seafood that included things like dried scallops and salted fish roe. Yet almost none of that culinary knowledge transferred westward in any meaningful way, despite centuries of maritime trade contact. Silk transferred. Porcelain transferred. Tea transferred so completely it reshaped British culture. Jellyfish did not. And that gap, a food eaten by hundreds of millions of people for over 1,000 years, essentially never crossing into Western kitchens despite extensive trade contact, is where this story stops being about biology and starts being about something else entirely. Part of the answer is genuinely mechanical. You cannot simply pull a jellyfish out of the ocean and eat it. Most edible species carry nematocysts, microscopic stinging cells packed with venom, distributed across their tentacles and, in lower concentrations, across parts of the bell itself. Handling a fresh jellyfish without knowledge of which species is safe and without proper processing carries a real risk of painful, sometimes serious, sting injuries. This is not a trivial barrier. It's the same kind of barrier that kept humans away from other foods that required specialized knowledge before they became safe to eat. The way raw cashews contain a toxic resin that must be roasted away, or the way fugu, pufferfish, remains legally restricted to specially licensed chefs in Japan because a single, improperly removed organ can be fatal. Jellyfish sits in a similar category. Not impossible to eat safely, but requiring a body of specialized generational knowledge about which species are safe, how to harvest them without injury, and how to process them correctly. In coastal China, that knowledge developed over roughly 1,700 years and was passed down through families and trade guilds. In the West, that knowledge simply never had the chance to develop, because there was never sustained cultural or economic pressure pushing anyone to figure it out. And here's where the story connects to something bigger than jellyfish specifically, the same pattern that keeps showing up whenever you look at why one culture eats an animal and another doesn't. Availability alone rarely creates a food tradition. Pressure does. Coastal Chinese communities developed jellyfish cuisine not simply because jellyfish were present in local waters. Plenty of other coastal regions around the world have jellyfish too, but because a combination of population density, limited alternative protein sources in certain periods, and an existing culinary culture built around extensive seafood processing created the conditions where figuring out how to safely harvest and preserve jellyfish became worth the effort. Once that knowledge existed, it compounded. Techniques refined. Trade networks formed around dried jellyfish as a stable, transportable commodity. Recipes developed and were passed down. A food that starts as a solution to a practical problem, how do we use this abundant resource, gradually becomes a cultural institution, complete with its own dishes, regional variations, and eventually genuine culinary prestige. Western coastal communities never faced that same pressure, largely because they never needed to. European and American fishing traditions developed around finfish, shellfish, and crustaceans that were, for most of history, abundant enough that jellyfish never became a necessary fallback protein. Cod, herring, oysters, lobster, all of these were plentiful along Atlantic coastlines for centuries, providing more than enough protein without anyone needing to develop the specialized knowledge required to safely process a stinging, gelatinous animal that most fishermen regarded as, at best, a nuisance that fouled nets, and at worst, an active hazard that could sting bare hands during a normal day's work. There was no generational pressure pushing anyone toward figuring out jellyfish cuisine, so nobody did. The knowledge gap that exists today isn't really a gap at all. It's simply the absence of a tradition that never had a reason to form. But there's a psychological layer here too, separate from the purely practical one, and it might actually be the bigger obstacle: texture. Western food culture, broadly speaking, tends to categorize gelatinous, translucent, wobbling textures as somewhere between unappetizing and actively off-putting, a category that jellyfish falls squarely into for anyone encountering it without cultural context. This isn't a universal human reaction. It's a learned one. Cultures across East and Southeast Asia have a much broader acceptance of gelatinous and chewy textures as desirable qualities in food, not flaws to be masked. Think of the popularity of tapioca pearls in bubble tea, or the specific prized chewiness of certain mushroom varieties, or the textural appeal of properly prepared tripe in numerous Asian culinary traditions. Jellyfish fits comfortably within that broader textural framework. Western food culture, by contrast, generally prizes very different textural qualities: crispness, tenderness that yields easily, a clear separation between what feels like meat and what feels like something else. A properly prepared jellyfish salad, with its distinctive springy crunch, doesn't map cleanly onto any existing Western textural category. And food that doesn't map onto an existing category faces an uphill battle for acceptance regardless of taste or nutritional value, because texture, more than flavor, tends to be the thing that triggers an instinctive, pre-rational reaction before anyone even gets to evaluating whether something tastes good. There's also a labeling problem hiding underneath all of this, and it's worth pausing on because it reveals just how much perception shapes what people are willing to try. For decades, the small amount of jellyfish that did make it into Western awareness arrived almost entirely through the lens of Chinese restaurant menus, often listed simply as jellyfish salad or jellyfish appetizer, with little context about the preparation, the history, or the specific species involved. Compare that to how an unfamiliar Western food typically gets introduced to a skeptical audience. Careful branding, an appealing name, a chef with credibility vouching for it, a compelling story about sustainability or tradition. Jellyfish never received that kind of introduction in most Western markets. It simply existed on the appetizer section of a menu, unexplained, competing for attention against dishes with far more familiar names and textures, and easily overlooked or actively avoided by diners who had no cultural reference point for what they were looking at. Now here's where the story takes a genuinely interesting turn, because the same environmental pressures that are making jellyfish an ecological problem are simultaneously making it an increasingly compelling solution. And a small but growing number of chefs, researchers, and environmental organizations have started paying very close attention. As ocean temperatures rise and overfishing strips out the fish species that normally compete with and prey on jellyfish, populations of the animal are expanding in regions where they were once far less common, including parts of the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and coastal areas of the eastern United States. Marine ecologists studying this shift have increasingly floated an idea that sounds almost like satire but is being taken seriously in scientific literature. If overfishing helped create the jellyfish boom by removing their natural competitors and predators, then eating jellyfish directly, turning the problem into a food source, could theoretically help rebalance marine ecosystems while simultaneously providing a low-impact, sustainable protein source that requires no farming, no feed, and no freshwater input of any kind. A handful of chefs in the United States and Europe have begun experimenting seriously with jellyfish as an ingredient over the past decade, part of a broader culinary movement toward what's sometimes called invasive or opportunistic cuisine, deliberately incorporating species that are ecologically overabundant into fine dining as a way of drawing attention to sustainability issues while creating genuinely interesting dishes. Restaurants in cities including New York, Copenhagen, and Barcelona have featured jellyfish preparations on tasting menus, sometimes reimagining the traditional Chinese cold salad format with Western flavor pairings, other times exploring entirely new preparations. Pickled, dehydrated into crisps, or incorporated into broths where the collagen contributes body and richness without adding any noticeable jellyfish flavor of its own. Since properly processed jellyfish is largely flavor neutral, taking on whatever it's dressed or marinated with far more readily than most people would expect. There's also research interest coming from an entirely different direction, food science and nutrition rather than culinary trend chasing. Researchers studying alternative protein sources in the context of global food security have specifically flagged jellyfish as a candidate worth serious investigation, precisely because of the sustainability math involved. Jellyfish require no freshwater, no land, no feed crops, and reproduce far faster than most conventional livestock, or even most farmed fish species, some species capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction, allowing populations to expand explosively under the right conditions. From a pure resource efficiency standpoint, Jellyfish arguably represent one of the lowest input protein sources available anywhere in nature, requiring essentially none of the infrastructure that makes land-based meat production so resource-intensive. The primary obstacles aren't biological or environmental at this point, they're the same cultural and psychological barriers explored earlier: unfamiliarity, texture aversion, and the simple absence of an existing culinary tradition that Western food culture could draw on the way it eventually drew on sushi, or ceviche, or countless other once unfamiliar foods that gradually became mainstream through sustained exposure, effective marketing, and enough culinary champions willing to introduce them patiently to a skeptical audience. And that comparison to sushi is worth sitting with for a moment, because it offers a genuinely useful roadmap for how an unfamiliar food eventually crosses a cultural barrier that once seemed impossible. Raw fish was, for most of American history, considered strange at best and dangerous at worst by the mainstream public. Something associated almost exclusively with immigrant communities and treated with the same instinctive suspicion many Westerners still bring to jellyfish today. The shift happened gradually, through a combination of dedicated restaurateurs, careful marketing that emphasized freshness and craftsmanship rather than unfamiliarity, and enough sustained cultural exposure that an entire generation grew up considering sushi not exotic, but simply normal. There's no biological reason jellyfish couldn't follow a similar trajectory, given the right combination of culinary advocacy, effective framing, and enough sustained exposure to gradually erode an aversion that, as with so many food taboos, has far less to do with the actual qualities of the food itself than with the simple accident of which culinary traditions happened to develop where, and which ones never got the chance. So pull all of this together, and the actual answer to the original question looks nothing like what most people would assume walking in. Jellyfish isn't avoided in the West because it's inherently unsafe. Hundreds of millions of people have safely eaten properly processed jellyfish for well over a millennium. Though the traditional alum curing method does carry one real, still-studied concern. It can leave the final product with aluminum levels higher than health guidelines recommend, which is part of why researchers are now developing alum-free processing methods. It isn't avoided because it lacks nutritional value, it offers a genuinely interesting protein and collagen profile that nutrition researchers actively study for its own merits. It isn't even avoided because it tastes bad, since jellyfish itself carries very little inherent flavor, taking on whatever it's prepared with, meaning the entire question of whether someone would enjoy eating it comes down almost entirely to preparation, not to any fixed property of the animal itself. What actually kept jellyfish off Western plates was a combination of practical circumstance. Coastal communities that never faced the pressure to develop the specialized harvesting and processing knowledge required. A textural profile that never found a natural place within existing Western culinary categories, and the simple accident of geography, and trade history that let some foods cross, from east to west over the centuries, while others, despite centuries of contact, somehow never did. And that leaves us with a genuinely strange closing thought. Right now, in the specific regions where warming waters and overfishing have created ideal conditions, jellyfish populations are expanding at a pace that is actively destabilizing local marine ecosystems, clogging power plants, and devastating fishing industries that depend on the very fish species jellyfish are increasingly outcompeting. Meanwhile, an entire culinary tradition spanning over a millennium already exists, fully developed, fully tested, ready to turn that exact ecological problem into a sustainable, low-impact food source sitting largely untouched just outside the boundaries of Western culinary imagination. The animal didn't change. The ocean around it is changing, creating exactly the kind of pressure that historically pushes cultures toward developing new food traditions out of necessity. The only real question left is whether Western food culture will do what coastal China did 1700 years ago: look at an abundant, sustainable, slightly strange animal drifting through the water, and decide it's worth the effort to figure out how to eat it, or whether that knowledge stays exactly where it's always been, 1,000 miles away. On a menu most people walk past without a second glance,